If the 2300 days in Daniel 8:14 are years, that can only mean one thing. 1844 was right, and William Miller's movement was not a false, nor a recent 19th century invention. You're watching Biblical Hope. I ran across an interesting work here from Leroy Edwin Froome called Prophetic Faith of Our Fathers. And he talks about a physician's contribution, Arnold Villanova in the 12th century, Arnaldus of Bachuone, circa 1235 to 1313. He was a brilliant scholastic physician, adept in alchemy and astrology, although we like to refer to it as astronomy as it later developed. He was less known as a lay theologian, but more as an ambassador and king of popes, of kings and popes. He was one of the most colorful figures of the Middle Ages, actually treating Peter III, king of Aragon. And one of the interesting things I found that was remarkable and testified to this guy's wisdom in the 12th century was he wrote on diet and hygiene, and his principles were very advanced for his time. For example, in his De Esu Carnium on the eating of meats, he contended against the critics of the vegetarian diet used by the Carthusian order. And he actually introduced one of the earliest examples we have of brushing your teeth daily in his De Regimine Sanitatis on the rule of health. And he talked about bathing newborn infants daily. He talked about hydrotherapy, cold baths, vapor baths, showers. This guy was brilliant for his time. He truly was a wise man in his day, if you will. And he took a lot of heat for recognizing that the Antichrist was going to be coming about pretty soon. In fact, he got tried at one point, arrested, released on bail, tried and convicted, and forced to recant, and his treatise was condemned about the coming of Antichrist. But one of the things that I found interesting was he was one of the earliest to identify the 2300 days of Daniel 8:14 as years. Why is this so important, folks? Well, for centuries, scholars have recognized a union between Daniel 8 and Daniel 9, specifically in the prophetic time periods. Take a look at the parallels. Daniel 8 leaves the vision at the very end of it with Daniel not understanding it, but in chapter 9, the angel comes along to give him understanding. What's he giving him understanding about? Well, the vision that he just had that he didn't understand. So the principles for the 70 weeks, such as a day for a year, you look at the time period of 457 to 27 AD when Christ was cut off, later on in 31 AD. You're looking at a day for a year principle for the 70 weeks, but why not apply that to the time that it was cut off from, which is the 2300 days? Now, anybody who does math, you can't cut off 490 years from 2300 days, but you can cut off 490 years from 2300 years. And that's precisely the conclusion that William Miller arose to later on. Is he realized that when it says 70 weeks are determined for thy people, that 70 weeks are cut off from the 2300 years. And so the question is, when did this time period start for the 2300 days or years or the 70 weeks? Well, that would have been when the decree going forth to rebuild Jerusalem went forth, and that was in 457 BC. You can take a look at some of my other videos on this that establish that fact. But can we really establish that somebody 800 years ago really understood the 2300 days as rightly they should as 2300 years? Well, folks, I hope you understand a little bit of Spanish, perhaps, or some sort of Latin language, because we're going to delve into that here, and you're going to see for yourself just how ancient this idea was. This is not a 19th century Adventist idea. This is a Protestant idea that has been around for over 800 years, folks. William Miller was building on the shoulders of giants before him, giants of faith who understood the Bible and knew what it was pointing to. So this is Arnoldus de Villanova, and you can look him up on Wikipedia. They have some nice images here that I kind of find interesting and colorful. But by the way, this is his work available on Google Books. It's one of his works on medicine. This is his philosophy of medicine. And you can see him referencing in here his concepts of avoiding meat. But let's go to the Vatican Digital Library. I want to look up Arnold of Villanova, and I want to get a ancient manuscript of his, folks, and I want you to be able to find it yourself. So you can go to digi.vatlib.it, and we're going to look up VAT 3824, folks. Let's find this. Here we go, 3824. This is Arnoldus de Villanova, 1240 to 1311. This is Introductio in Librum Dissemini Scriptuarum, qui est de philosophis dormientibus sive and dormientium prophetis. All right, let's click this and we're going to get into the reader here. So these are our folios, our locus of 1R through 12V. And I've got another page pulled up right here with the actual manuscript. So we can click through this and let's go down to, here's Folio 1. I just love the typeset. Isn't that the most beautiful font right there? I think their art for these old works is just so striking. But let's keep going down here, and I want to turn to Folio 7V and 8R. And yeah, let's go ahead and zoom into this here. Okay. So we can come right down here, and I want to note this statement here: dies duo, that's days 2. Okay, let's go on to the next page here. All right, we've got that here. Okay, milia trecen. Okay, so 2,300 days. Okay, and days, what he's saying here is intelligere, or we understand, annos. We understand as years, okay, of prophecy. Now I've got the English translation for that entire statement here, but you can see for yourself, dies intelligere annos, okay? So days we're understanding as years. So let's take a look at what they're saying. When he says 2,300 days, it must be said that by days he understands years. This is clear enough. The explanation of the angel when he says that in the end the vision will be fulfilled, from which he gives it to be understood by clear expression that in the vision days are understood as years. And so he repeats this statement farther on down the script. Okay, so now let's go just a little bit farther. We're going to go a little bit farther down because, and we're going to find here what line it begins on. So check this out, folks. Here we go on lines 14 through 20 on column 1 here. And this is Folio 8R. You can see it yourself. And he references scripture here. Now, this is the same scripture that Adventists look to 800 years later. Okay, so take a look right here. He says, when he's talking about scriptura, dies intelligit annos. And who is he referencing for this? He's referencing that Ezekiel testified that days equal years. And you can see this in Ezekiel 4, verse 6. So why don't we go to Google here, and we're going to look up Ezekiel 4, verse 6. And when thou hast accomplished them, lie again on thy right side, and thou shalt bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I have appointed thee each day for a year. So folks, he realized that the prophetic symbol of days represented years. Now folks, if it's 2,300 years, that excludes Antiochus Epiphanes, because every expositor who tries to apply the 2,300 days to Antiochus Epiphanes, it fails when you look at 2,300 years, because how do you describe 23-year period in history when the Jewish temple was demolished or destroyed or profaned or whatever? How do you describe that? But now if you look to the heavenly sanctuary, and you look at that as an antitype, and you combine that with the 490 years, starting from 457 BC, it brings you down to 1844. And this was a thought process that Protestants would build upon for centuries because it was the truth. And 1844 takes us to God's judgment hour, when a movement arises telling the entire world God's judgment hour has arrived, and rightly magnifies the law, specifically the seventh-day Sabbath, and Christ's work in the most holy place, and what our response should be during the antitypical Day of Atonement. And that is something that the entire Christian world has forgotten from 800 years ago, from one brilliant physician. You're watching Biblical Hope.